waiting to get more information is often more harmful than just making the wrong decision. If you really want to build the right product, you want to build the right experience, you have to viscerally understand it. Like if the company is doing well, the money will come. If the company is not doing well, it kind of doesn't matter how hard you try, like the money will not come. You don't need everyone to like you. And in fact, not everyone will like you. You only need one person to kind of be a believer.
All right, I'm very excited for this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast. But before we start, our famous disclaimer that the views expressed on this podcast are for informational purposes only and not financial or legal advice. Consult with a professional for your specific situation. And the views are not necessarily reflect the views of Finalis Inc. or Finalis Securities LLC, member FINRA SIPC. All right, now that we got that out of the way, Waseem, how are you doing? Thank you for being a guest on this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast. And well, for our listeners, give us a little background of your career up into this point and tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here. My journey started, I studied computer science at MIT with actually my co-founders. And we've done 3 companies together. The first company we did right out of school was based on my co-founder Jeff's master's thesis. He had developed some technology to update systems without requiring a reboot. I'm sure you've seen that pop up. It's like, you must reboot, install new updates. He had developed this tech that could take these updates and transform them so they could be installed without the reboot. And we did a little startup around it. And it was interesting kind of looking back on that. We did not know anything about anything, but just the product was so good that it all just works. So we bootstrapped that company. We lived in kind of like a gross little row house in Central Square in Cambridge, ate a lot of ramen. We ran that for about 3 years. Oracle acquired it. We were at Oracle for a year and a day to transition over the tech and kind of do the next thing. Left, started another company called Zulip. It was a group chat tool for businesses, kind of like a Slack-like product at a time when Slack was still making a mobile game. Did that for about 18 months, a little shy of 2 years. Dropbox acquired it. Was at Dropbox for 2 years. Left, started this company, Pilot, which we've now been doing for almost 8 years at this point. We started in early 2017. Where we do accounting, tax prep, basically the financial back office for startups and SMBs. And the thing that's like pretty interesting about what we're doing with Pilot is we're not selling you accounting software. It's not, oh, buy this instead of buying QuickBooks. What we're saying is we are your accounting firm. Like you hire us, you're paired with an accountant who's a full-time US-based employee of ours. They sit in our office in Nashville. We have a bunch of engineers in San Francisco. We're building tech that we use to communicate with you, to do the work more accurately, more efficiently, more reliably. And the net experience is just you get a much, much more white glove, hands-on, high quality experience for your companies, bookkeeping, tax prep, budgeting, forecasting, all that stuff.
Okay, now there's so many different areas I want to take with these questions. I mean, one, this doesn't sound like that typical Silicon Valley startup because it sounds like there's too many people as service business, all these things that many investors and entrepreneurs would probably say, don't go there. But before that, I'm also curious about those 2 quick wins that you had very early on in your career. That first one, getting acquired and then staying a year and a day. What was that transition period like? Were you thinking the entire time the next thing you wanted to work on? How did you even go into that acquisition? Were you thinking, I want the shortest transition time possible to go on to the next thing, or was that proposed to you? How did you even come up with that agreement? I'm just curious.
Yeah, sure. It's funny. It's one of these things where definitely looking back on it, I agree with your narrative. Like, oh, it was a pretty quick stint in both of these companies. Did not feel quick at the time. Let me say that the 3 years we spent working on Ksplice, the year I spent at Oracle, it definitely at the time felt quite long. I think all of us knew when we joined Oracle that we were not destined to remain there forever, and that we knew we wanted to do another company. In fact, we wanted to do another company together. It was basically the same founding team, essentially. And so sort of, I think like even on day one, we kind of had that in mind. And why a year and a day? Well, there were some incentives to remain longer than that, actually. But I think it's tough. I mean, I was probably like 25 at the time. It's just, it felt a little bit like, oh, I still have the time and energy and I want to do something new. Like the big company is not the place for me.
That's interesting. So it sounds like you actually gave up some more upside in order to leave early to go on to your next. Were you doing a risk reward assessment there, or were you and your buddies just like, time to go? Oh, let's go.
I mean, a little bit of both. I think there's a certain amount of like, you just kind of know in your heart of hearts, like this is, I need to go do the next thing. And then there's also like, yeah, like if you do the financial calculus, it's like, okay, if the next thing is successful, it will make much more sense to have gone and done the next thing, even though you're leaving some money on the table. And that was the case too when we left Dropbox. So I left Dropbox after about 2 years, and there were incentives to stay longer. And Dropbox was great. I like learned a lot there. I met a lot of amazing people. We had a lot of fun. It's just like, but the same calculus kind of applied.
Is there any advice you could give founders right now that might be looking at that opportunity where a big companies come in, give them an acquisition offer, and there's that tail period that, hey, we want you to stick around for 3 or 4 years? Any advice for how they should be kind of thinking about that when that's part of the offer on the table?
Yeah, definitely. So a few things. One is companies are bought, not sold. So I think you have to kind of keep that in mind, which is there has to be a strategic reason that the acquirer makes sense for them to acquire you. It's hard to go and shop yourself. The second is these things are not done until they're done. And you have to remember the big companies have whole teams of people whose whole job it is to buy companies. So just because someone reached out from corp dev at XYZ company and they said they might want to buy this, you're many steps away between that and like a transaction actually happening. So like tamp your expectations, like adjust your expectations accordingly. These things take longer. You'll get a worse deal than you think. It probably won't happen. Like there's all kinds of kind of roadblocks between that first conversation and something really materializing. But then the third piece of advice related to the question you just said is like, I would not underweight quality of life. Meaning, if you're fortunate to have two options, so you're deciding between company A and company B, and they're both interesting, and company A offers you more, but you and your team are going to do better at company B and you'll stick around longer, you should probably pick company B. Because in addition to it being kind of more economically valuable because you'll stay longer and you'll hit more of those kind of retention incentives, you'll just have a better experience. So I think you have to like, yes, the dollars obviously do matter, but I think you also need to consider like how long will you actually be able to stay at the acquirer?
I'm wondering with that though, say your company did take outside capital, I would guess that the investors in most situations would probably almost be legally obligated to their LPs to say, hey, you're going to that company A, whether you like it or not, because that offers monetarily better. We don't care about your sanity, your health, or anything else like that.
Well, it depends on the stage of company you're selling, right? Like for our first company, we had bootstrapped it. So we owned 100% of it. And for the second company, we had raised some angel money, but there was no institutional money. The board was us. So we still had full control. I agree in situations where you don't have control, you don't have control. You kind of have to do what you have to do.
That is an interesting component right there that I'm guessing not many founders really think about that. Okay, once we get to that next round, we're going to lose some of the control, and then our options for that exit or how much say we have in that exit completely changes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think venture capital is not right for most businesses, in part for this reason. But I think folks need to understand that like you are committing to a certain path when you take venture money. And that path happens, it can be very good. It is the path that has created most of, the world's most valuable companies that were formed in the past, 20, 30, 40 years. But it has disadvantages.
So for that exit to Fox, were you at that time kind of thinking we should go and raise institutional capital, and then this offer kind of came? Or
basically, yeah, we were talking to folks about raising a Series A. We had raised a small seed round, and this was 2014, so all of these numbers are much smaller than they are now. We had raised a small seed round. We were testing the waters on raising a Series A, and Drew from Dropbox approached us and said, hey, you know what, like, why don't you come join us here? And sort of laid out the vision for the company and why it would be a good fit. There was a lot of like good alignment there. And we're like, oh, no, this actually does make sense.
If you hadn't had that conversation and you went towards raising that A round, how would your life be different now?
Well, these counterfactuals are very difficult. Like the bull case is okay, we would be Slack, and Salesforce would have bought it for $44 billion or whatever. The bear case is we would have been a company you've never heard of that got its lunch eaten by Slack. so it's hard to say.
Okay, and then after you're at Box for a while, and time went by 2 years, and you're like, okay, now it's time to do something else. Was there an idea already kind of baking in the back of your mind, or was it more let's just leave and figure out something later? Or I mean, how did you come across the idea for Pilot?
Yeah, so it was very much not that there was a specific idea in mind. And in fact, I took 6 months off just to kind of like rest and relax and recharge and visit friends, visit family, and kind of spend time on all the things that basically I had neglected, while doing the startup or while working at Dropbox. And for me, it was very much kind of about the team. It's like, okay, I knew I wanted to work with these same co-founders again. Let's figure out something new that we're going to do together. And the way that we arrived at the problem was really, and this is consistent across all three of these companies, it was really based on pain we had ourselves in our previous ventures. Like Ksplice was born out of pain. The Linux kernel updated thing was based out of pain that my co-founder Jeff had when running systems at MIT. And so he built the thing to solve it for himself. He built the tech to solve it for himself, and we built the company around that. Zulip, the group chat tool, we built because of our lack of satisfaction with the group chat tools that existed when we were doing Ksplice. And Pilot, we built because it was a huge pain to do our own accounting and tax in our previous companies. Like it was not our area of expertise, and the providers that existed were incredibly old school. It's like, okay, show up with a shoebox of receipts or whatever. Like there was not sort of the modern, obvious kind of like forward-leaning, tech-enabled approach to actually kind of do this in a really high-quality way.
Were you discouraged at all at the very beginning from friends and family saying stick with software only?
No. I mean, definitely investors, I think, were the most skeptical, though, as you said, which is especially in 2017. Now, like, there's still skepticism, but there's like a little bit less skepticism because like LLMs or whatever. But I think, for everyone who didn't invest, the reason was always, well, it seems pretty human labor intensive. Like, are the gross margins ever going to be good? Like, we like to invest in software. This is obviously a software company in that it's founded by a bunch of MIT engineers who are very good at writing software, but also like it's kind of an accounting firm too. And like, what do we do with that? It's definitely it's a somewhat contrarian approach when we started the company.
And I definitely want to dive deeper into the company itself. But I was just thinking that after that comment you just said, 3 MIT engineers. I mean, that's a similar skill set that you gentlemen had when starting the company. You normally hear about founding teams where one has a sales background or marketing or something like that versus all core engineers. How was that starting the team or the companies? And were you thinking at any time, oh, we should bring someone else into this core group, or we're lacking this, or were the team members' skills all complementary in a way that it filled all the gaps?
Yeah, I mean, no, we never really thought about that. In the first company, we sort of had to each figure out our niche. Like, okay, what is Jeff going to do? What is Jessica going to do? What am I going to do? What is Tim going to do? Like, what are all the people going to do? Even though we all sort of like had similar backgrounds. By the time we did the second, or certainly by the time we did the third company, we had already developed like fairly deep benches of expertise on sales and marketing, or on running the back office, or on engineering, or whatever it is. So definitely by the time we were doing the third company, I think that the team's skill set was much more well-rounded than my brief summary there suggests. In the first company, absolutely, it's like we didn't know anything about how to do anything, and there was a lot of kind of learning as you go. But I think it's good. That's fun, and it's like good and healthy for you.
In this current company, I mean, it's gotten bigger than anyone probably could imagine. Definitely bigger than your two before.
For sure.
What were the skill sets you had to learn, and kind of where was the biggest growth pain point in this journey so far? Was it around that Series A? Was it around like where was it that you realized, hey, I need to add more tools to the tool belt?
Oh, I think constantly. Like the challenge is like once you've mastered it and you're growing, now you're suddenly playing a new game and you actually don't really know how to do it. So at every stage, at every inflection point, it's like, oh, okay, cool. We got to $1 million of revenue, or we got to $10 million of revenue, or we got to $20 million of revenue. It's like we got to $50 million of revenue. Each of these steps unlocks a whole set of new challenges where it's like, oh, now I need to go and figure out how to da 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 da. And it's like, well, I actually don't know how to do that. And the playbook that got us here will not get us there. It's just we have to do new and different stuff. And the game just totally changes.
What's been your best, I don't want to say life hack, but best way to quickly learn or adapt or get these new skills that are needed to get to that next milestone?
I mean, you find smart people in your network. You lean on your investors and advisors to just say, okay, who is best in class at thing X? And let me go talk to them, both to get kind of a baseline understanding of like the thing itself, but also to develop a little bit more of an intuitive feel for like, what does good look like? Like, okay, who are the best practitioners here? What are the backgrounds they have? How do they approach the problem? I think there's no substitute for talking to, or maybe listening to and learning from the folks who have already done this before, or who you know, or it is known to you that they do it well.
Has there been any recent or conversations, not in the last year or so, that you just went, oh my gosh, and had an aha moment from that person or that conversation that was pivotal to next steps?
I mean, I'm sure the answer is yes. I think a specific instance kind of escapes me here, but I like a number of times over the life of the company, you have conversation, you're like, oh yeah, no, we have been thinking about this totally wrong. And you go and you then do something else. Or, I was really skeptical previously of blah, 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 because at our size, it didn't make sense. And now actually it is time to layer it on. I mean, here's a very concrete one. It's actually pretty recent, which is, as we've thought about marketing, historically, my bent on marketing is very, very quantitative. I'm like, show me the ROI. This is how much we spend. This is how many leads we got. This is how much revenue. Like, you do the math for me about like why this thing is worth doing. And I think I was very, very resistant to doing stuff where that attribution was either impossible or very difficult, because it kind of felt like fluffy. Like, oh, you want to spend a bunch of money to do this brand campaign, but you like can't demonstrate to me at all that this is going to do anything for the business. Like, no, we're not going to spend money that way. And I part of me still like believes that view. On the other hand, the challenge is like this stuff actually does, when done well, if you have deep conviction in the activity and it's going to reach potential customers in a way that's going to deeply resonate with them, like, yeah, you're not going to be able to measure it immediately, but it's still worth doing. And I think it took me like a bunch of conversations with people smarter than me on this topic to finally kind of bring me around on that point.
Now, is this something where that pivot in thinking should happen later in the company's development, or kind of on day one? But I would think at the beginning, every dollar is so precious.
Well, that's the challenge, right? I mean, it's tough, because I think like the point is true in general. And in the early days, that kind of big brand spend can make you seem bigger than you are. And so it could be worth doing. It's just, for all of this stuff, the problem is you are never going to have, this is true in general in startups and probably true in life in general, you're never going to have perfect information. And so the art of kind of running your startup is like basically the art of making the best decision that you can given the information you have. And waiting to get more information is often more harmful than just making the wrong decision. And so I think there's a certain amount of like, okay, you're constantly like a little bit outside your zone of comfort. It's like, well, this is what I know about the world. I need to make a call. Like, let's do it and let's see what happens.
Speaking of information, your company released a report with some alarming information and insightful content about salaries and that. But one, can you talk a little bit about this report? And then two, I'd like to kind of dive into kind of the importance and the value of founders out there knowing what other founders are actually making salary wise, and that how that can come into kind of planning things out thoughts. So, I mean, love for you to share with the audience that.
Yeah. So every year we release this founder salary report. And what we do is we survey a bunch of founders and really ask them a very simple question, which is, what are you paying yourself? And then we slice it by geography, by industry. Like we do it by amount raised. We do a bunch of kind of cuts on the data. And the reason that we do this, like the reason that we do the founder salary report in the first place, is because there's actually a fair bit of information asymmetry, meaning founders don't know this because founders are generally not talking to one another about, okay, how much are you paying yourself? Like, what is market? And I think in having a conversation with your investors and your advisors, with your board, with anyone, like it is very helpful to say, well, listen, here is the market data that exists on this stuff. This is therefore why I should pay myself XYZ, or why my founders, co-founders should pay themselves, XYZ amount. Or this is how this stuff has trended with time, and kind of like, what does that imply about, the state of the ecosystem? And so we do this every year. And we did one very recently to kind of like get the latest snapshot on, what are folks doing? How are they paying themselves? The other kind of bit of data that I would say is like, the data is helpful, but also I think one of the things that founders need to remember to do is to make sure they're paying themselves enough to cover their expenses. Meaning if you are sweating making rent, or like, do I need to take the bus, or can I take the subway, or do I need to take a taxi to like get from point A to point B? That's energy that you're not using to make your startup more successful. So there is an interesting kind of like, balance of like how do you pay yourself? Not too much, not too little. Kind of what is the landscape there? And so it's always a kind of a very, very interesting set of data. So we're very excited to do it. We have a 2025 edition, which I think has been very, very useful to founders.
For those founders' salaries, how does factors like the stage of the company, the geography, how do those kind of impact the compensation decisions?
Yeah, so there's, again, we've surveyed kind of like almost 2,000 participants in this edition, and some of the stuff is cost of living based, but a lot of it is actually like stage of the company, or kind of like what the company can afford. Like one of the questions we asked is like, how did you actually determine your salary? That like you had personal requirements, you look around for market rate, just as little as needed. And by far the kind of like most popular answer was it was what the startup can afford. Meaning it's like, okay, you have to strike some balance between, yes, of course, I need money to do what I need to do. And also I want to make sure that the business is as set up as possible for success.
One thing I did notice that was interesting in the report, it looks like the average salary for founders last year to this year, and last year, I forget what stage, but it was 98,000 or so was the medium, whereas this year it's 75,000. I mean, how should people think about when they see these numbers declining?
I think it's probably, a sense in the market generally of conservatism, which is, okay, we don't live in an era of plentiful venture funding. And also I think like it's an era of scrappiness where folks are like, okay, let me see how far I can get under my own power. And I think that's actually good. Meaning, again, going back to the first thing we talked about, I think if you have control over your destiny, that's very powerful. And one of the ways to achieve that control is actually to keep the company's burn rate low. Because then you can say, well, actually, I'm a cockroach, I'm unkillable. If you get addicted to this kind of high burn rate, it's like you can get yourself in a very precarious spot where if your burn rate is too high, but the company's metrics aren't good enough to keep raising money, like you're kind of out of luck. But if you sort of avoid that problem, like you have a lot more flexibility.
I'm wondering about kind of the use of this information in ways that people might not immediately think of. Like, I'm wondering, I mean, could this information be used for, say, if a co-founder leaves the company and people are brainstorming a compensation package for them? I mean, and actually for that, I mean, what are kind of industry norms for something like that?
Oh, I think it's very case by case. I mean, in case of co-founder departure, I think it is. There are lots of factors that kind of go into that. I would say the kind of most commonplace that this data is used is like you've just raised some money and you're discussing with your board kind of like what you should set compensation as. That's, I think, where folks have kind of seen the most utility out of it.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, if you're venture backed versus, self-funded, how are you seeing the discrepancies there for owner salaries?
Well, there's a little bit of misalignment of interest, right? I think in the venture backed case, it's like your investors, I'm speaking in generalities here, but your investors like almost want you to pay yourself as little as possible because then the dollars are deployed elsewhere and making the business successful. And then you probably, it's not that you want to pay yourself as much as possible, but you want to be fairly compensated for your work. So there's a bit of a tension where probably you're trying to pull the salary up, but your investors may be trying to pull the salary down. And so I think being able to say, well, look, this is the market data. This is reasonable. This is not too high. This is not too low. Is very helpful.
How do you recommend founders setting those salaries for, the other kind of the core team, the first hires?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's so interesting about the founder salary is like you're hopefully, if the business is doing well, founder compensation is dominated by your equity, right? It's like hopefully that's where you're making the vast majority of the money. And that's true for early employees too, but it's substantially less true for early employees. And so for early employees, I think you can lean more on market data. Like, okay, I'm hiring a first engineer. Like, what is appropriate or what is market for engineering salaries? And yeah, I'm not going to pay that full amount because there's going to be a generous equity component to the offer as well. But you have like a comp where there's actually a lot of data to say, okay, fine, what is an engineer with this amount of experience? Like, what would they get if they went to company X? And you can use that as a reference point. Those data points don't really exist for founders. That's kind of why we put together our report.
That report, I mean, you mentioned it didn't exist before for founders. You put that together. Is this report going to expand over the years, or is it always going to be? I mean, is the scope going to get bigger over time?
I mean, we're laser focused on like the founder and the business owner. And there are there are a bunch of companies out there that do kind of broad-based compensation data in various industries. Oh, you have a sales rep, what you pay them. Like, so we specifically felt like, what is the niche that felt underserved for the founder, for the business owner? We thought it was specifically kind of founder comp. And so that's really where we're laser focused with this particular report. And obviously we do a bunch of other stuff around the ecosystem.
And then how do you see, I mean, companies right now are looking, or maybe the data has changed. I haven't really had too many conversations around this lately, but at least for a while there, it was geared towards, hey, these companies need to get profitable as fast as possible. How has that changed in the kind of the model of the companies that have taken outside funding? How has that shifted the thought process around salaries for the founders and some of the team members?
I mean, I definitely think that there is a feeling of, okay, the fundraising market, unless you're a hot AI company, the fundraising market is like pretty tough. And because the fundraising market is pretty tough, you want to extend your runway as much as you can. And one of the ways that you can extend your runway is founder salaries. And so I think folks, you're definitely seeing that in the shift of the numbers, but you're also seeing it in the kind of like the attitudes and the commentary from founders that we've seen out there.
During the fundraising journey, at any time does it get easier?
Not really. I mean, no. Here's the thing that I think people should remember about fundraising, which is you don't need everyone to like you. And in fact, not everyone will like you. You only need one person to kind of be a believer, to actually kind of, invest in the company at a given round. But I think for all of the fundraising rounds we did, it was never a super slam dunk. Even for us, 3-time founders, like MIT engineers, had 2 successful exits, like a very investable profile. Still, it's just like, well, actually, you could imagine a world where this fell apart and didn't come together. Again, for us, I think a lot of investor skepticism was around gross margin. Can you make gross margin good enough? Is it really going to look like a tech company, or is it going to look like an accounting firm? And ultimately, we did make gross margin very good and continues to be good. And so we happen to prove those particular skeptics wrong. But I think it's always, I don't think anyone really has a truly, super, super easy time of it.
Are there stories you hear or things where you go, that founder, their fundraising journey, they're making mistake after mistake with either timing or the milestones or traction and with your conversation with other founders over the years, what are some of the mistakes that come up on occasion or often that you go, not rookie mistake, but just kind of maybe not best practice?
Well, look, I think there's a structural thing here, which is that people think of fundraising as success. And what people should think of is fundraising as a necessary evil to get the company to where it needs to get. And if you could build it without raising money, you should. It turns out for many businesses, you can't. It's just like fundamentally, they're pretty capital intensive from the get go. And it's better to raise that capital and grow faster than to not. So I think step one is push out of your mind this idea that fundraising is success. Like the thing that is success is building a product or service that people want and are willing to pay for. And if fundraising happens to be on the path to do that, great. So be it. Go for it. Do it. But if you're I'm going to do this so that I can raise money, I think that's a mistake. And that's kind of true more generally is anytime you spend talking to investors or whatever, it's time you're not spending building the company and making it successful. And so I think it is easy to spend a lot of time unfruitfully on the fundraising process. Whereas the thing that actually paradoxically makes your company more fundable is not needing to raise money. If the company is doing well, the money will come. If the company is not doing well, it kind of doesn't matter how hard you try, the money will not come. And so I think folks need to understand it's just it's not that it's perfectly correlated to that, but it is more correlated to that than people think. It is hard. No amount of great pitching will make an unfundable company fundable. And if a company is doing super, super, super well, basically, no matter how bad the pitch is, it probably will find a way to get funded.
Speaking of that, the report noted, I believe, a 77% increase in bootstrap startups. Does this mean the trend is that the founders are self-selecting out of raising capital, or that, what do these numbers kind of represent, kind of mean?
Yeah, I think a bunch of stuff. One is definitely, I think there's a more popular trend of I'm going to raise one round and be done, or I'm going to forego the fundraising model. You hear all this talk of okay, we live in the era where you're going to have the first, single person unicorn company or the first single person $1 billion company or whatever it is. So I think there is this idea that smaller teams can do more now than they ever could. And that therefore maybe the right answer is keep it super lean. And so I think that's leading to the rise of bootstrapping. The whole indie movement, I think, is leading to the rise of bootstrapping. And then also it's just the availability of capital today is not what it was in 2020, 2021. And I don't think it will ever return to that. And I think there's some folks that are just finally internalizing that and saying, okay, cool. I'm passionate about this thing. I want to build it. I'm going to have to get it off the ground myself and sort of demonstrate that it really works before I'm able to raise money.
And what do the next few years look like for Pilot?
Kind of more same in some ways, which is we're really just beginning. We're simultaneously the largest startup-focused accounting firm in the US, probably the world, with 2,500 plus startups as clients. So we're, 10x probably bigger than the next biggest firm. And this is the smallest we'll ever be, right? The aspiration is to do this for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of businesses of all kinds. And that's just the thing that makes the business so exciting to me is that the opportunity is enormous. It's how do we go about just serving more customers better than we ever have? It should be the case that a customer that signs up now has a way better experience than when they signed up at the very early days of the company where literally I was the one doing your accounting. And that's a pretty hard, it's a pretty high bar. I think I did a pretty good job. But that's kind of what we push ourselves to do.
Did you have any accounting experience before, or were you kind of winging it, going, okay, I think these are the numbers that go here or there?
Well, we had a sense of how to do this because we had done it ourselves in our previous ventures. So it was not that there was no training. We did know what we were doing, especially as it relates to startups. But I think there's a certain amount of if you really want to build the right product, you want to build the right experience, you have to viscerally understand it. And for us, the software we write is in service of two different customers. Customer number one is our actual customer. It's the end user, the client, who hires us to do the accounting and tax. They interact with us on a Zoom call, by email, on the phone, but also kind of via software we've built. And how do we make that experience good? The other customer is our own accountants, right? We hire full-time, as I said, full-time US-based accountants that sit in our offices. And we've built a bunch of software that they use to do the work more accurately, more reliably, more consistently. And so it's important that you're building stuff that they can kind of use effectively that does the job really well. And the only way to do that is like you have to have experienced it yourself firsthand.
Just wondering, in the coming years, as the company keeps growing and expanding, where do you see the bottlenecks? Where do you see potential issues arising? And then as a founder, how do you go about pre-planning those instances?
Yeah, I mean, look, the blessing and the curse of Pilot is our model, right? It's we are the accounting firm. And there's a real person here who is your account manager who does the work on your behalf. And so what that means is if, Sean, if this podcast is incredibly popular and I 10x my customer base tomorrow, like I actually don't have the accountants to serve that. So there's a fair bit of work that is involved in keeping kind of like your capacity to deliver high quality work and your customer count kind of moving in lockstep. If it's skewed one way, bad things happen. If it's skewed the other way, bad things happen. You kind of have to keep the two in sync. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, how do we attract and retain world-class talent? And how do we get folks trained up on the Pilot way of doing things so that they can be productive faster? And how do we do a good job forecasting demands so we're able to keep these two kind of in lockstep?
How much of a data company would you say it is having to collect all this information to really plan things out versus, I guess that's the question. Like how much is data making the decisions for the company, or how much do you recommend founders out there relying on and collecting data to make decisions versus kind of a gut feeling?
It depends on the decision. It depends on like repercussions of the decision. Like I think there are some things where like your sales process and your sales forecast, if you are able to predict your sales numbers, what that means is you really understand how it's working. Like you understand the machine, you understand the inputs of the machine, you understand the outputs of the machine. And that's where you want to get. If you have no idea where the month is going to end halfway through the month, what that says to me is probably your stuff is not rigorous enough. You need to kind of figure out how to up-level your own visibility into what's going on, with your sales pipeline so that you can do that. So that's an area where I think like you do want to be very data-driven. You want to have good predictive power there. If you don't, it's a problem. There's other stuff where it's just like, okay, what is the feature we should build? It's like, yeah, you should talk to your customers, but there's also like a kind of gut, like, okay, this is the thing. I have a lot of conviction that this thing is going to be very impactful given what I know about our customer base.
And Waseem, we've covered quite a bit on this interview. Is there any topic or question that wasn't asked that you wished was, or even in past interviews, something that hasn't been covered to date that you really think the audience out there could benefit from learning from your experiences?
I mean, I think it's not that this topic has received no coverage, but I think what people underestimate is like how much of an emotional journey it is for the founders. And I think you have a couple scarce resources. One is the company is dollars, obviously, like the company can't run out of money. But another is just your own energy level and like your own psychology around how do we keep pushing this thing forward day in, day out. And there are days when it's going super well and you feel amazing. And there are days when it's going awfully and you feel terrible. And it's like, how do you sort of manage your own kind of emotional state in that time? And I think that's hard. And I think it's kind of under discussed. I think it's important for founders to like actually do the work to reflect on, fine, what do I need to re-energize so that I can tackle this, fresh the next day?
Any best case practices, thoughts of, getting a CEO coach, going on, doing a marathon, training, the gym, any best practices or thoughts, or just taking a couple a week sabbatical or something? What are some ways to unwind that?
Yeah, I'd say three things, and they're all somewhat simple and somewhat obvious, but I think it's still, so worth saying. It's like sleep enough, like definitely get enough sleep, get some exercise, and then actually like ideally find other founders who like understand the journey that you can commiserate with. And it's just like, there's nothing quite like talking to someone else who really gets it.
All right. We'll leave on that note. Waseem, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be on this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast. For our audience out there, I'm not the host. I'm an investment banker focused on mergers, acquisitions, growth capital, secondaries. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Sean Flynn. And if you want to find out about our past episodes, what we're up to and what we're working on, go to thesiliconvalleypodcast.com. And with that, Waseem, I can't thank you enough for this week's episode of the Silicon Valley Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.